This season in the NBA is an absolutely massive year for a couple of different teams. We all know that things can change literally overnight in the NBA. One star changes their mind, decides to go to this team, or one team decides that it's now time to rebuild and completely tear down the roster. And for these four teams, this season could be that year for them. Really quickly though, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Prize Picks. And if you've never done Prize Picks before, right now is an awesome time to get started. We've got the return of the NFL, the NBA is going to be coming back soon. There's all kinds of sports stuff happening right now, and Prize Picks is a great place to be this time of year. Now, if you've never played before, I have a fantastic offer for you later on, but let me first explain exactly what Prize Picks is. So you go onto the app or online, you pick between 2 and 6 players on Prize Picks, and you look at their projections, their numbers, and you pick either more or less for between 2 and 6 players. And if you get those selections correct, you can win up to 25 times your money. It's just that simple. The great thing about this time of the year as well is there's so much going on sports-wise. You can mix and match sports. You can pick more or less for all these different NFL things. You can pick more or less for all these different basketball things when that season gets started. Baseball, of course, as well. And they have great promotions on a weekly basis that allow you to get that much more of an edge against these numbers. And if you're worried about competing against other players, you're simply not. It is just you against the numbers with an opportunity to win some cash. So if this sounds fun to you and you've never done Prize Picks before, you can click the link down in the description. You can use code SPORTING for a 100% deposit match up to $100. So if you deposit $100, Prize Picks will match it, and you will have $200 in your account to play with to start with at the beginning of this NFL season. And again, it's a great time to get started with Prize Picks right now. And thank you again to Prize Picks for sponsoring this video. Let's start with the New Orleans Pelicans. This has been for years one of the most interesting teams and rosters in the entire league because the talent, the assets, the youth, everything looked fantastic on paper. And at the beginning of last season, we finally started to see what that would actually look like when it was going well. They were one of the best teams in the Western Conference. They looked like a team that was a legitimate contender. And then of course, people got hurt. They couldn't figure out how to reintegrate players back into the lineup, and they were never the same again. And this year, we are going into the year with the exact same mindset that we've had about New Orleans for the last couple of seasons, which is if they're healthy, if their young guys continue to grow and develop, if they can figure out a way to get Zion, Brandon Ingram, these guys to play better together, they can be one of the best teams in the Western Conference. And that is still true this season. Their ceiling is certainly still there. However, if it doesn't happen this year, if a year from right now, we're still thinking about the Pelicans as this theoretical team, this team that on paper has all these great assets and has all these great players, but only wins 42 games, they're going to have to change something, whether that be the coach, whether that be getting rid of some of the veterans like CJ McCollum, or in the most exciting and interesting scenario, trading away either Zion, Brandon Ingram, or a handful of other young players to really go out and make an aggressive push towards winning. And the reason that this is critical is that you have to understand, not only is this a team that wants to be good, but there are people in charge here that don't want to lose their jobs. There are people in the front office that are thinking, if I get fired as a GM of the Pelicans, I'm never getting another GM job. David Griffin knows that. And so if this season isn't going well partway through the year or at the end of the season, they will make changes. And I don't see how, if they win, 40, 42 games, injuries continue to be an issue, the young players don't figure out a way to play better together. If they have another season like that, I can't envision a scenario where they go into the following season and say, you know what, we're going to try this again one more time. Maybe this year we'll be healthy. Maybe this year we'll have it figured out. That has to be something that changes. And I think depending on what happens with New Orleans this year, their roster could look massively different, not only a year from now, but honestly, maybe a couple of months from now at the trade deadline. Next up, let's talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, I've talked about this in some recent videos, but the more and more that I think about it, the more concerned I get about the future of Donovan Mitchell in Cleveland. Because when they made the Mitchell trade last offseason, it was one of the more interesting deals that I'd seen in a long time, because the concept of a player like Mitchell, who isn't, a top 5 player in the league, but he's an all-NBA caliber player, an incredible player, a young player, someone that still has a lot to provide to a franchise, obviously. When that guy ended up getting traded from Utah to Cleveland rather than like Utah to LA or New York or Miami or one of these bigger market teams, and also a team that hadn't fully established themselves as a true contender or would be a contender once acquiring Mitchell. Once that happened, and there's videos about this, I started thinking, is this a new era that we're entering into in the NBA where guys are going to look more at the basketball opportunity that is there in a situation like Cleveland and want to go there rather than just going to a big market, just going to play alongside other stars, because at the time, bringing in Mitchell alongside all the other young guys that they have with the Cavs was a better basketball situation than going to, for example, the Knicks and playing alongside a couple of their guys. And of course, they get Jalen Brunson and they're awesome. But that was a really interesting pivot point to me of Mitchell being a star, ending up on a team that wasn't a big market team. However, all that gets erased if Cleveland disappoints in the playoffs again this year, and then Donovan Mitchell is going to be looking for a new team. He just is. He's going to be a free agent soon. Cleveland can't risk losing him for nothing, and they actually have the opportunity to still be a good team over the next couple of seasons. Even if they do have to trade away Mitchell, they can still be good. They've still got plenty of pieces, and this to me is a team that has a ton on the line this season. I'm not really sure if there's another team that has as much pressure on them to just win a postseason series as Cleveland, because the other teams that you would think of, teams that we're going to talk about throughout the video, the expectations are either way higher than that or way lower than that. But Cleveland just needs to win a postseason series, and the way that year one went for them in the playoffs was just a complete disaster, and they have to figure out exactly what they want their team to look like moving forward after this year, and hopefully that still includes Donovan Mitchell, because I want this to work. I want a team like Cleveland, quote unquote smaller market team, to have a star like this, to have someone that maybe didn't want to be there initially, didn't request a trade to go there specifically, but the basketball situation worked out really well because it opens up the opportunity in the future for teams like this to do the exact same thing. But if it doesn't work out, Donovan Mitchell's going to be on a new team in a year. Speaking of smaller market teams, let's talk about the Milwaukee Bucks. I've talked about this in some recent videos, but the Giannis stuff has gotten a little bit weird, and it's not just his comments and coming out and saying that he's not sure if he wants to continue to sign an extension, and some of the things I talked about in that more recent video about him kind of already earning his championship in Milwaukee as the hometown guy, and now he can go and bounce around to other teams and he won't really be judged for it, because the point is to try and win as many titles as possible, and how that impacts his free agency here in a couple of seasons. But more interestingly, I think for Milwaukee is there's a disaster scenario that exists for them this season that is really uncommon for a team that still is considered a top tier championship contender, and it's just because of the age of their roster. Chris Middleton was not healthy last year. Drew Holiday's had plenty of injury issues throughout his career. Same thing with Brook Lopez, and all of those guys are getting pretty old. I mean, all of them are in their early to their mid 30s, and there's a scenario in which one or two, maybe even all three of those guys miss significant time this season, and the responsibility on Giannis to try and drag this team to 50-55 wins is going to be so heavy for him that at some point he's going to start looking around and wondering, not only is this team good this year, but also this is as good as it gets. These guys are not going to be getting any younger anytime soon, and then maybe he starts to really evaluate his options elsewhere around the league. I think that is absolutely the situation that Milwaukee is in right now, and one that they should be really, really concerned about, is the age of their roster and what that looks like to Giannis as he really starts to evaluate his options. Last up now, let's talk about Minnesota. This is a little bit of a weird one because there's a lot of different directions to go in. First and foremost, we're really in year one of the Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns experiment. I know that technically they were both on the roster last year, but Cat barely played last year, and theoretically the too big thing is just not going to work, but we do still have to give them a little bit more time to see exactly what that's going to look like. So that's option one, is they really need to figure out if this is going to work, and if not, as I've talked about in previous videos, Karl Anthony Towns is really the guy that you would look to move, not Rudy Gobert, because you could get a lot in exchange for Towns, really spread out the talent throughout the roster. That's step one of, if this season goes poorly, it's pretty likely, in my opinion, they're going to explore moving one of the bigs, and it almost has to be Towns. There's no way they're getting anything in exchange for Rudy Gobert. Or, more dramatically, do you start getting concerned about Anthony Edwards' future in Minnesota? That is the true disaster, worst case scenario for Minnesota, because Karl Anthony Towns is a good player, has really developed into one of the better, perimeter offensive bigs in the league. Rudy Gobert is good, McDaniels is good, but everything about your franchise revolves around Anthony Edwards, not only him being fantastic as he's developed so far in the NBA, but also his happiness and his willingness to continue to stay in Minnesota. And if this season doesn't go well, they start to shake up the roster, whether they trade Cat, they trade Gobert, whatever the case may be. And if that move then doesn't go well, then you're starting to put yourself in a very dangerous position as a Minnesota franchise that hasn't had very much success over the last couple of decades in the NBA of, are we going to lose what I think is one of the most exciting, talented young players in the entire league in Anthony Edwards? Are we going to lose him as well as a result of multiple bad roster decisions? And that line of thinking, that train of thought really starts, in my opinion, this season if things don't go well for Minnesota. There's a situation where things go really well, and maybe the roster works out exactly the way they envisioned it when they made the Gobert trade, and they could be one of the best teams in the conference. I 100% believe that. But if it doesn't, they're going to be in some real serious trouble, just like all the other teams we've talked about throughout this video.